A friend of mine who regularly attends AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, tells me that in their discussion, in their vocabulary, the word fear stands for future events appear real. And what that is communicating is that so often our fears take us away from the present moment and force us to live in an unknown future that we worry about. Jesus today tells us, don't be afraid. Many times we hear that in the discourse of Jesus, but also throughout the Bible. I'm told it's a phrase that is present in the Bible at least 70 times. What is it about fear that is so dangerous and should be considered a temptation of the evil one? Well, first of all, fear, as that acronym, future events appear real, signifies, takes us out of the present moment. But it's precisely in the present where God works. It's in the present reality, the limited circumstances of our lives, the broken relationships, that God precisely is present. That is how we understand Jesus as taking on our human condition, not just taking on our flesh, but all existence of living in the present moment. And so to give in to fear in some way loses sight of how God is working in our life today, not giving a sense of courage and hope, but rather worrying about the future. But fear also is a temptation because it takes advantage of our weaknesses. It takes the weaknesses in our lives, the failures that we have, the wrongdoing, and convinces us that that is the sum total of our life. And so we are put in a situation where we begin to think that our lives are just a failure. But the gospel tells us, and Jesus has come into the world to let us know, that we're more than our sinfulness. We're more than our failures, because God redeems us. He takes our lives and makes them whole. He redeems them. Fear, however, takes those weaknesses and puts them before us as though they are the sum total of our life. And so the right response is to dismiss those fears, because in fact God loves us in our frailty, in our mistakes, even in our sinfulness. But the other thing that fear does is it paralyzes into action. I was talking to a young man who was thinking about asking his girlfriend to marry him, and he loved her very much, but he was afraid of what the commitment would mean, of what his life, how his life would have to change. And he thought about the future in a way that was somewhat unrealistic. Again, it was like that acronym, future events appear real. He fantasized about all the things that could go wrong, and so he was paralyzed into acting. That is what the evil one wants to do. He wants us to, in some way, ignore the fact that God is present in our lives in the present moment, and by distracting us to look at the future. He also tempts us in a way that takes advantages of our weaknesses, our failures in the past, giving us the impression that that is the sum total of our life. But also fear, that is a temptation by the evil one, paralyzes us from taking action. So a good spiritual life is one that dismisses fear, but reminds us that God is in the present. There's a real distinction in the Bible between time that's understood as chronos, that is the series of events that take place, and kairos, the time in which God is working, and that is the present moment. When we stop and meditate in our prayer of all that God is doing in our lives, it's an opportunity for us to recapture the fact that the fears are a fantasy. They should be dismissed, and we should be given the freedom to act according to God's calling in our lives in a way that also helps us understand that we are more than our failures, more than our sinfulness. Indeed, we are the beloved of God.